I can't think of any other country in the world that would think it's somehow extreme to want to have border control and therefore to be in charge of how many people come in into your country. And that seems to me quite a reasonable position to take.
Celebrating a new beginning, a new Europe.
In 2004, many former communist countries joined the European Union. A moment of unity and history for a continent that had seen decades of ideological division. At the time, net migration from the EU stood at 15,000 a year. But a new era was about to begin.
In 2004, we had the enlargement of the EU. Unlike some of our EU partners, we said, yeah, anyone who wants to come from the 8 countries from Eastern Europe can come straight away. Well, that was a mistake, and it's been acknowledged that that was a mistake.
A new queue for the newcomers, able to have their passports checked in the EU channel for the first time.
Government commissioned some studies as to what sort of additional numbers might we expect. And lo and behold, they were told that it would be no more than 13,000 a year. It's a hell of a lot more than that.
Within 3 years, the figure was almost 10 times that, as annual net migration from the EU went above 120,000.
The public weren't told. There was a deliberate decision by the Labour government, which I voted for, and a member of the party. It was a deliberate decision to keep the public in the dark about immigration, which is utterly shameful. And they did that because they knew that the public would balk at the numbers who were coming in.
But many would argue that any economic benefits of migration have not been spread around.
For the top 4 or 5%, they get a gilded life of much cheaper nannies, of their basement extensions in Notting Hill are done both more speedily and more cheaply by Polish immigrant labour. If you go outside London, you will see that the big problem there, one of the big problems, is low wages. And those wages are being lowered time and time again by cheap labour coming in from the continent.
Hello, Angie speaking.
Angie Cook runs a transport business in Boston, Lincolnshire.
Yeah, we can do that for you.
She used to supply drivers for the haulage industry, but says her company folded because of competition from a rival agency.
9 a.m. in the morning. Yeah, no worries at all. They were bringing the drivers over here by the busload. Hi. If I'd have reduced the wages for the drivers, they would have left. If I reduced the prices to the customer, I wasn't making a profit. So where do you go? And this was because someone had been across to the EU and recruited all these drivers and put them in cheap, low-cost housing that our drivers and our workers cannot compete with.
Yeah. Angie has started a new business, and she'll be voting for Brexit because she's had enough of the EU and its supply of cheap workers.
Now, I don't know if I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this or not, I don't care. I only employ English drivers.
Across Britain, hundreds of thousands of European migrants are in low-paid work. In sectors like agriculture and tourism, they're a vital resource for many businesses.
It's very difficult to get any of the local people to do the job, and it's a very high demanding job as well. I start with field operative. Now in winter time, I'm line operative in the factory, and I have the chance to be promoted.
It's often said that Europe's migrants will do work that British people won't, at least not for a low wage. our economy needs the low-skilled or the unskilled
Well,
people
I
as well.
disagree with you. I fundamentally
fruit
disagree with you
picking,
on this. This
warehouses,
this has
internet
been an absolute nonsense in the UK economy for some time. You get a lot of nonsense from businesses suddenly saying to you, oh, we've tried to hire British workers, they just won't work. When you investigate it, you find they didn't bother at all. They were going outside because they knew they could get a lower wage for these people, and thus that would improve their profits. Now, I am fundamentally against that.
A Bank of England report found that broadly, migration has had a small negative impact on average British wages. And crucially, it concluded that workers at the low-paid end of the spectrum have been more affected. Many are asking, where will they all live?
To meet the needs of the population increase that is largely the result of that scale of immigration, we would have to build something like 250,000 houses a year. We're building nothing like that. It's a nonsense to suggest that we're going to suddenly build that number of houses that are required, be it in London or elsewhere throughout the country. We're simply not going to do it. So all that is going to mean is more and more of a shortage of housing, largely because of the increase in our population, which, as I say, is largely driven by migration.
84% of families in this country get their first choice of secondary school. So it doesn't suggest that there's a massive problem with school
No, but the
places.
recent report from the Education Department made it very clear that they're having to build significantly more numbers of schools to deal with the plan and the forecast on migration and the existing migration. It's just what they've said. And even beyond that, there is a strong perception and a recognition that it does play a role from the British public. So there is one way to deal with it. You can dismiss it. You can say that 84% means not a problem to settle, not an issue. They're talking nonsense. In which case, this will just grow and grow as a concern because it's not being dealt with by British politicians.
Something is going wrong in the way that we are spending what we get in income tax, for example, from these EU migrants. The Revenue and Customs said recently that EU migrants pay about £3 billion a year in taxes. Is it getting lost somewhere? Why is it that we have the effect on services?
It's a very
we're talking
narrow way
about?
of looking at it. It's not about saying it's okay because someone pays taxes, so that's fine. Because it's not the sole issue. The issue I come back to is about human beings. We tend to put these things into just the money, but it's human beings, and the nature and the scale of that immigration puts pressure on people in the way that they assimilate with people who often they're not speaking English as a first language, often bringing their kids over. That makes the British people uncomfortable in many places because it is on a scale that they would otherwise not have expected. Expect a lot from people who live in communities and have to accommodate this, have to live with it, have to sort out their schooling, many people competing for jobs with them. I think, therefore, controlling the scale of that migration is important so that they have time to be able to get to terms with that without feeling as though this is a problem for them.
We had this somewhat bizarre argument during the renegotiation with Brussels that, again, the country can control net migration by restricting the amount of welfare for EU migrant workers, as if Bulgarians, Romanians and Poles are going through the welfare policies of European states and are adjusting their plans accordingly.
Now the Vote Leave campaigners, even those who were part of Cameron's government, seem to want to distance themselves from the whole issue. Is there such a thing, in your view, as benefit tourism from the EU?
I think, if I'm honest about it, I think there may be. It's very difficult to nail down the figures in this. I mean, I did see somebody say that most people in the Eastern Europe didn't actually know what the benefits were here. So I'm a little ambivalent about this one.
Because you sounded pretty convinced about it last year when you said that you wanted the benefit tourism was a nut that you wanted to crack.
Yes, I think for those that do come over, I've never said they're a vast number. If the question is, do I think that it is a huge driver for people coming over here, the answer is categorically not. I do not
it turned out to be not such a large nut.
Well, it's a nut in the sense of having people over here collecting benefits in a certain degree, particularly things like family benefits, which struck me as absurd. But as I said at the time, this is an issue, it's not the issue.
In fact, EU migrants are less likely than UK nationals to claim unemployment
absolutely.
benefit, housing benefit, tax credits.
I don't
all
result
of
from
those.
that at all. That's probably true. I want to be welcoming to all people from all nationalities, but there is a issue if you let people come in at their own numbers, the growing numbers that there are, at a scale which is unprecedented. My argument is that it therefore puts pressure on people.
The public knows a lot better than the BBC does about immigration and has a far better grip on the subject. And they can see that Polish people, that there's no cultural problem. There is not the remotest cultural problem at all. There is an economic problem, and they wish it would stop because it harms their income.
You can even see negative perceptions in communities established by previous phases of immigration. This is Brixton in South London.
Don't get me wrong, Michelle, I do support migration to an extent, but my concern is that there has to be some control as to how much we can realistically accept without causing any particular damage to the system. We welcome that, but we have to have a cap, or else we're going to have such an influx that we can't manage.
I saw some statistics the other day, and the majority of these people are coming here to work. It does affect our housing, but then why aren't we building houses? We didn't have enough houses for our own people.
What are the important issues for you?
It's jobs, and of course also the issue about immigration, and a whole lot of people coming here then basically not working, feeding off the benefit system. So that's a big issue. Yeah, it is.
Is it an issue that would make you vote to leave?
For me, yes, maybe.
There are a lot of people here now, so if we be by ourselves, I think it would be much better. I mean, too many immigrants.
Border control isn't about saying no to migration. It's about saying no to just open-ended migration that suits people to pay low wages. My kind of idea about migration is to say, what does Britain actually need? Do we need skills? Do we need software engineers coming from India? Absolutely, if they're there and they're bright. We don't have enough here. We want to get more trained. Do we need more people to teach people software here? Yes. I want to balance this out. This is not an anti-migration. This is an anti-uncontrolled migration.
We are not going to stop people moving around the globe by leaving the EU. This suggestion I've heard all my life from various people that, you use immigration to frighten people. It's always been a very potent political weapon throughout my life.
It's a real concern for voters.
It's a concern for voters. It's also a potent political weapon for some politicians.
For now, the politicians hold the floor, but soon it will be your turn to cast your vote. Immigration is just one issue in Britain's often complex relationship with Europe. But how you feel about it may decide whether you think Britain should stay in or leave the European Union.